For the past several years, there has been much discussion on the topic of depression. In fact, we have seen a large number of people diagnosed with depression and treated accordingly. And the question has been asked, is this becoming an epidemic? Is it something new to our culture? Is it created by our lifestyle? Or is it simply the fact that more people are being diagnosed? The answer to that most likely lies in all of the above. Whatever the answer is, we do know that many people struggle with this dilemma and need answers for it. And while certainly a class or a sermon or a lesson of this nature will not answer all the questions, it is important to understand that the Bible does address this topic. So in this presentation, we're going to take some time to explore what the Bible has to say concerning the topic of depression. As we think about this, I want to begin with a disclaimer. This is not something that I'm going to present as a doctor or as a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counselor. I am a gospel preacher. I've studied the Bible as much as I can, and I believe that I've got some things from the Bible to share with you. And I give this disclaimer for the simple fact that I am not encouraging anyone to stop the present treatment program that they're on. In fact, that's something to be discussed with a medical or psychological professional. Instead, my goal is for us to discuss things from the Bible, to understand that while things of the secular side certainly are important, more so are things from the spiritual side, that we do not need to dismiss what the Bible has to say on this topic. Besides being a preacher, I'm also a school teacher and have been for a number of years. And one of the subjects that I teach every year is high school economics. And so I'd like to begin there with an illustration. Now, don't worry, this is not going to take a long part of our discussion, but I want to make a point here about this. If you remember back to your high school economics, you know that supply and demand are very important in an economy like ours. And one reaches equilibrium in business when demand and supply meet. And that's the goal of any business. It's to make sure that you are able to give the customer a product when the customer desires that. Now, if anything happens to either the supply side or the demand side, things are going to get out of whack in a hurry. And while that might apply to one business, when it applies to an entire economy, big problems are going to occur. So if there are a number of businesses that are going downhill, either demand is not what it needs to be or supply is not what it needs to be, then the economy begins to falter. And if it is not corrected very quickly, the economy is going to go into what's called depression. I think that's very significant that the same term we're talking about in this study from the psychological side is also the same term used on the economic side. Something is keeping the economy down. It's depressing the economy. And though everyone in the economy wants it to get better, something's keeping it down. Well, a similar thing can be said about depression. Here is a person who wants to be better, yet something is keeping that person down. So the question then is, what are we going to do about that? Well, again, let's stick with our economic illustration here. If equilibrium is where supply and demand meet, what would we say then is equilibrium as far as God would define it for our lives? So let's imagine that this line is the equilibrium in our lives. And what we're seeking to do is to get everything to that point. So what is that equilibrium? Well, God's answered the question for that. In fact, two different times, once in the Old Testament in the book of Psalms, once in the New Testament in the writings of Peter, the Lord says, this is equilibrium. The one who desires to love life and see good days. I think you, like me, would agree that's where we want to be. I oftentimes think of the old hymn that says something to the effect of, life here on earth is just full of toil and pain. that living below in this old sinful world, hardly a comfort can afford. Well, that's not my life, nor do I want that to be my life. Well, I know bad things are going to happen. My goal is to love life that God has given me and to see good days. But we also understand that that is not a constant, is it? Because there are times when things get in our way. So let's imagine this red X as being the disruption in the equilibrium of our life. And that X can represent a whole lot of things. It may be something that we've brought on ourselves. It might be alcohol abuse. It might be drug abuse. It might be sexual perversion. It may be that we are in the kind of a life that is leading to that disruption. Or it may be something totally outside of the boundaries of our control. We think about a family member who passes away, or maybe a really good friend who passes away. Or maybe we lose a job, or we take a terrible financial downturn, or our health gets bad, or a whole host of things. Or maybe this X is the compilation of lots of little X's, lots of little things in my life that happen in a near proximity of time that cause me a great deal of trouble. So whatever that X is in your life, the question then is, how is it going to be overcome? So if I'm seeking to maintain the equilibrium in my life, to love this life and to see good days, how am I going to deal with the disruption? For most people, they simply get over it. Now that's going to happen in several different ways. There are some people who have such strong demeanor that they say, this is a terrible thing in my life, but it's not going to stop me. And so maybe it's someone who has gotten involved in drugs or alcohol or whatever. And they say, I'm going to stop, and they do. Well, they overcome the X. Or maybe it's someone, and this is more likely, where a family member has been lost, or a job's been lost, or a global pandemic occurs, or whatever. And the person says, I am resolving myself that this is not going to mess my life up. I'm going to get over it. And then there are others who are kind of dragged across the X by a good support network. And so while one might want to abandon hope, there are plenty of people around who are pulling this person over the X. But what happens when we can't get past that X? Well, here's where depression comes in. So it's kind of like the economy. Everything's been thrown at it. We've tried everything, but equilibrium can't be attained again, and we see things going down in a hurry. That's what happens when there is this problem or this series of problems in our life that we simply cannot figure out how to deal with. And because of that, we allow it to sink us. We allow ourselves to become very upset by these things. If that's where you are, or if there are people in your life who are at that place, one of the things to understand is that this is not a new problem. As we said earlier, it may be diagnosed more than it used to be, but it's nothing new. And how can I say that? I can say it because the Bible is filled with depressed people. I'm not going to try to take time in this presentation to go through all the different ones, but let me give you just a couple of examples of this. We find, first of all, a woman by the name of Hannah. Now, if you're not terribly familiar with your Bible, that's fine. But just to give you a little perspective on this, Hannah is the mother of a prophet named Samuel. But Hannah is the wife of a man who has two wives, and she's unable to have children, while the other wife has no problem and also has no problem running Hannah down because of that. And so this particular verse is found when Hannah is at the tabernacle, and she's very upset, and she's been accused of being drunk by the priest there. And Hannah said, no, my Lord. She's saying, I'm not drunk. She's saying, I am a woman troubled in spirit. Well, that's depression, isn't it? Wouldn't we say that's an apt definition? Where we can't maintain that loving life and seeing good days? I think also about the psalmist. psalmist. In fact, how many of the Psalms could we find that are filled with these messages of depression, where life is not what it needs to be? And again, if we had plenty of time, we could go through several of these, but let me give you just one verse of one Psalm. And that's from the 88th Psalm, verse 18, where the psalmist says, "You have taken me from friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend." If we found that statement written in a child's diary or spoken by one of our close friends or a family member, we would become very alarmed. Yet here is a psalmist who, by the inspiration of God, is having this recorded for everyone to read. So within probably half of these Psalms that we have in the Bible, there are words spoken to God, and words that we might be very uncomfortable with, that are calling God to wake up or to come to my rescue, or to kind of, as we would put it, get on the ball with these difficulties I'm having. Yeah, God includes these for us. Now, we can also consider the number of people who are actually asking God to take their lives. Again, I won't belabor the point, but there are some big name folks here. You think about Moses. He's troubled by what the Israelites are putting him through, and he feels kind of caught in the middle between them and God, and he says, "Just take my life." And we think about Job, who had terrible suffering brought on him. And then he had supposed friends who showed up, and they make matters worse, and he calls for the end of his life. And we think about Elijah, who is one of the greatest of the prophets of the Old Testament. And he has this outstanding victory where God uses him to demonstrate the power of God over these false prophets of the land. Yet the very next day, when an evil queen is after him, Elijah says, "I just want to die. Just take my life." The same with Jeremiah, who's struggling with the people of his day and their wickedness and unwillingness to accept God. And he says, "I just want to die." We think about Jonah, who was given a mission that he didn't want to go on. And he said 3 times within the short book that bears his name, asking the Lord to kill him. Well, if we had plenty of time, we would go through these and see the Lord's answer, because the Lord deals gently with these situations. He understands that humanity can get in this state where the ability to love life and see good days seems hopeless. And here are quality, godly people who are struggling with these things. And so if they can have problems in that regard, surely I can as well. So I want you to understand, if you are suffering from depression, you are not by yourself, nor is this something new. Just simply open the pages of your Bible. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of depression. There's an old word that's not used anymore, but it may be a better word for it, and that's the word melancholia. This would be the equivalent today of when we would say something to the effect of, "Well, I've got the blues." You know, sometimes I say that to my wife. I'll have a bad day, and I'll say, "I've just got a bluesy kind of day." And it means I'm kind of struggling over this loving life and seeing good days. And sometimes this can go for 2 or 3. And in recent times in this pandemic, I found myself struggling with this on a much greater basis. If this continues on, though, we'll see it growing into that idea of depression. But the term melancholia may be a better term for us to use, just simply because it's not the loaded term that depression is. But yet, with understanding that and understanding the concept of the blues and melancholia that's continuing on and growing into what we consider to be depression, let's transition in our discussion and talk about some of the deceptions that depression can bring us to believe. If I believe that I'm struggling with depression, I need to understand that there are things that may come to mind that are just simply not right. One of those is, because I'm unhappy, I'm depressed. Really, when you look at the Bible, you can understand that unhappiness and depression are really 2 different things. And if we think about it in our lives, we know the same. Happiness is very situational. If I can go back to an economic illustration, think about happiness like the stock market. If you watch the stock market in any one day, it may take highs and lows. That could be our day. We may start out really happy, and then we go out and our car won't start, and that happiness level goes down. Or, maybe I start running a fever, and so my happiness level goes down. Or my coworkers give me a surprise birthday party and my happiness goes up. Well, it's obvious that depending on the situation will depend on how happy or unhappy I am. And so there may be days when I am totally unhappy. And there may be a week or month where happiness just isn't there. Well, that doesn't mean I'm depressed. It just simply means that whatever the situation is at the time is not going like I want it to. Tie in with that also the idea that we sometimes cause grief to ourselves because we believe this. When we think, well, why can't I be happy like everybody else is? And I suppose, while this has always been the case, in more modern times, social media has exacerbated this idea. People have always struggled with looking at their neighbor and saying, well, my neighbor's got it better than me. But in modern times, we can go to websites and we can find people who are lauding all of these great things. And I'll just be honest with you. One of the things that I cannot stand, if you're a Twitter user, is that hashtag so blessed. Somebody puts up a picture of their newborn or a couple who's engaged or your first day on the new job, and they'll put on that hashtag so blessed. Well, I don't want to judge everyone, but for a whole lot of folks, that's just a desire to gain attention. To say, look at me. Yet what happens is, if things aren't going exactly like I want in my life, I look at that and I say, well, why is everybody else finding a fiance? Why is everyone else able to have children? Why is everyone else getting a job? Why is everyone else having all these parties? Well, I can almost guarantee you that if you could look behind the hashtag so blessed, you're going to find some unhappiness. You're going to find people who aren't quite as happy as you've been led to believe they are. But even if everything was true, someone else's happiness should not be a cause of my discontent. And so that deception can oftentimes cause our depression to grow even worse. One of the biggest lies that depression will feed us is this: nobody understands what I'm going through. Now, that's a very bold statement. You think about the billions of people who live on the face of the earth right now, who we cannot know. And then you think of the billions of people who have lived on the face of the earth, who obviously we cannot know. And it's a pretty audacious claim to say, in the history of the world, and with everybody living on the face of the earth, nobody can understand what I'm going through. This is a deception that depression throws at us. But nonetheless, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that's the case. No one can understand what I'm going through. Well, if that can be said by someone who's depressed, that can be said about anyone. So here's my life. I'm a preacher. I'm a school teacher. I've got certain family situations. I've got health and lack of health at times. Well, can't I honestly make the same statement? Well, nobody knows what I'm going through. Well, I certainly can. If it's true for someone who's depressed, it's true for someone who's not depressed. Here's the problem. When it's depression, this gives me a way out not to listen to someone. Here's someone who's trying to give me some encouraging thoughts, and we'll talk more about this here in a little while. But it gives me the opportunity to hit the mute button. You're not depressed, so you don't know what I'm going through, so I don't have to listen. I can assure you that if I get a very serious illness, one of the prerequisites is not going to be for my doctor that he or she has suffered by this illness. No, not at all. If I'm diagnosed with cancer, it's not a prerequisite that my doctor has had cancer and gone through treatments. No, my prerequisite is my doctor knows exactly what he or she's talking about. My doctor knows exactly what's going to benefit me in this. And so I would encourage you that if you're dealing with this, don't shut everybody out. Don't let yourself believe that lie that nobody can understand this. It may very well be that someone can offer very helpful advice. Again, one of the biggest problems that we find in these deceptions is I'm a victim of depression. I'm not going to talk a lot about that right now because we're going to come back to it here in just a second. But I want to get it in our list of things we're looking for where depression is lying to us. Let's think about one more in this regard, and that's a cure for my depression is going to be found in the right medication. Surely before long, there's going to be a new pill that comes out, or my doctor is going to find a combination of pills, or he's going to up my dosage or lower my dosage. It's just a matter of getting it exactly right. I want to illustrate that point in this way. There's a sickness that has become, again, very prevalent in recent times, and that's diabetes. A lot of folks diagnosed with it. For someone who is diabetic, medicine is extremely important. The insulin that someone needs in order to survive is very, very important. However, if this person who has been diagnosed with diabetes understands what that means, that person understands that certain lifestyle choices must be given up. I've put 3 things on the screen that I love. I love chocolate icing on a cake, and I love pizza, and I love candy. If I went into the doctor having problems and the doctor says, Mr. Chandler, we've gone through and we've tested and we've determined that you're diabetic. You need to start taking insulin. Okay, I get it. I understand that. But the doctor is also going to say, Mr. Chandler, you've got to make some lifestyle changes. No more of the chocolate icing. No more of the pizza. No more of the candy. If I were to say to my doctor, well, doctor, I'm going to be taking my medicine. I'll do it. I'll take the insulin. I'll do that just like you tell me. But I'm going to keep on eating these things, and I'm not going to exercise. You know what the doctor's going to say? He's going to say, well, then that medicine's going to make absolutely no difference. You need to just save your money because you're not going to survive this. The doctor is saying that it's the medicine along with the change of lifestyle that's going to help me to deal with this chronic sickness that I have. Let's make the same point about depression. If I go in and the doctor says, Mr. Chandler, you're dealing with depression, and I'm going to put you on this medicine to help. What my doctor is also going to say is, there's got to be some lifestyle changes. There's got to be some things in your life that you must use along with this medicine. Some changes that must go along with this medicine. So I want to talk to you about a few of those. Whatever your opinion is on this medicine, if you believe that it's helping, that medicine can't do it alone. So let's talk about some of those changes. One of them may sound very strange on the surface, and that's going to be in overcoming depression. The need to personify your depression. Now, again, that sounds rather strange, doesn't it? That I'm going to take my depression and I'm going to make a person out of it. So why would I even suggest something like this? The reason I do that is because it's always important to visualize your enemy. And this is something that we oftentimes do with medical issues. Let me give you an illustration, and I use this illustration by permission. I know a couple who had a daughter who was diagnosed with leukemia at a very early age, very, very young. And this couple faced a struggle in their family in finding the appropriate medications and treatments and lifestyle choices for their daughter. And after it was all over, the daughter's mother, Erin Miller, wrote a book. And I've got a copy of the screen, on the screen of the cover of that book. I want you to note the title, Fighting for Kate. And then look at the inscription below it, the inspirational story of a family's battle and victory over cancer. What is cancer? Cancer is a medical condition. Cancer is a biological problem going on within the body, unless it impacts your 4-year-old. And then it becomes the enemy. And I want you to note the language that's used here, fighting for Kate, the battle, the victory over cancer. What did cancer become? Cancer was personified. Cancer was the enemy who had to be defeated. I know another family that had a daughter and granddaughter who was diagnosed with Rett syndrome, this very unusual medical condition. Well, what is Rett syndrome? It's exactly that. There's something in the body, biologically, that's not doing what it needs to do until it's your daughter, until it's your granddaughter. And then it's the enemy. And so families who deal with this, it's a fight. A few months back, I had a grandson who is diagnosed with autism. What has that become for my family? Not just this condition, it's the enemy. What have we done? We've personified cancer. We've personified Rett syndrome. We've personified autism. We've said this enemy must be dealt with. So then, why is this important? It's because we got to know who we're fighting. Cancer, Rett syndrome, autism, depression is not a work of the flesh. But I'm going to choose a passage here that was spoken by the Apostle Paul about works of the flesh to illustrate our point. He says to the Galatians in chapter 5, beginning in verse 16, I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other. And then I want you to note what's stated here, to keep you from doing the things that you want to do. What does cancer do? What does Rett syndrome do? What does autism do? They keep us from doing the things we want to do. We don't want our children and our grandchildren having to be in treatments. We don't want that happening. Well, might I suggest to you the same thing can be said about depression? If my equilibrium is loving life and seeing good days, then depression is keeping me from doing the things that I want to do. And if I can picture it then as the enemy, it's going to help me to know what I've got to overcome. Therefore, when it is my enemy, I fight it with everything I've got. And the great news is we don't have to love this enemy. If a person's our enemy, God says, you be kind, you feed him, you give him water, and not so for this enemy. In fact, God gives us full-on permission to fight against it with everything we've got. Let me illustrate that from another writing of the Apostle Paul. He says, for though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. That's what we're doing with anything that is harming our spirituality, and certainly depression would fit into that category. And the apostle says what you must do is you must take every thought as a prisoner. Here's the enemy language again. You go after it, you take it captive, you don't let it destroy your life. You don't let it be the red X that's standing in your way of loving life and seeing good days. And so with that, we must understand that when depression is our enemy and we are fighting against it with everything we've got, we cannot allow ourselves to be swayed by passiveness. That's what depression is desiring. Depression wants us to say something like, I can't win this battle. There's nothing I can do about it. Oh, yes, there is. Just as with any sickness, there are things that can be done. There are things that must take place if I'm going to win that battle. So personify your depression. Make it your enemy, your mortal enemy, and you are not going to let it stand in your way, and you are going to take it captive. So how do we do that? Well, here's the big deal. The way we do that is that we have a real relationship with God. I want you to note why I didn't just say a relationship with God, but instead put in the concept of real. The reason I did that is because a casual relationship with God is at the very best going to be neutral. Let me illustrate this. Now, if you have a phobia of snakes, you just close up your ears or turn the volume down for about 45 seconds here or so. There's a snake that lives in my yard, a black racer, and I do not like snakes. But this snake does something. The snake keeps the bad snakes away, and he also is pretty bad on the rodents, which is a good thing for me. So I permit this snake to live. But it's with the understanding that A, he doesn't chase me, and B, he doesn't slither out in front of me when I'm walking by a bush or something. When he crosses that line, we're done. Our relationship is neutral. He's providing something for me, I'm providing something for him, but there's no love lost between us. That can describe our relationship with God. God can do a few things for me, I can do a few things for him, but no real love lost. But it's likely that the relationship would never stay there. That a relationship that is casual in nature would actually increase the problem with my depression. And that's because I'm going to pray to God. And I'm going to say, Lord, please take away my depression. And I get up the next morning and it's still there. Or, Lord, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. And please allow that to take away my depression. And it's still there. That can cause us to go in a very black hole spiritually, where suddenly we begin thinking, God doesn't care what happens to me. I want to go back to the psalm where we took our equilibrium passage from earlier. And that psalm is Psalm 34. I'm not going to take time to read it. If you'd like to pause this video and take a few minutes to read it, do so. But I want to note very quickly here what David says that he promises to do in relationship to God. He says, I will bless God. I will praise God. I will magnify God. I will seek God. I will cry to God. I will taste and see that God is good. I will take refuge in God. I will fear God. Now I ask you, does David take his relationship with God casually? Absolutely not. Anyone who will bless, praise, magnify, seek, cry, taste, see, take refuge in, and fear God is someone who takes God very seriously. Now, David also says, I understand that God will protect, God will give generously, God will hear, and God will deliver. David says this relationship is twofold. I'm giving and God's giving. God's providing protection, he's giving generously, he's listening to me, he's delivering. And David says, in light of all of these things, what that means is I must approach him in humility, I must keep from evil, I must do good, and I must seek and pursue it. Psalm 34 is a very clear picture of what it means to have a real relationship with God. But here's the problem. I pray and I pray and I pray. And it seems like day after miserable day, nothing changes. Have you ever been there? I have. There's something that you believe needs to happen. Maybe it is the healing of a family member. Maybe it's a change of employment status. Maybe it's a happier family life. And I pray and I pray and I pray, and it just seems like nothing ever changes. And so the temptation then is to say, I'm done with God. I have done what he said for me to do. I've prayed without ceasing. And he said he hears my prayers, but I'm getting nothing out of this. I'd like to point out to you the danger of that attitude. In that attitude, you have made God your hostage. And you've said to God, the only way you get to survive in my mind is if you give me absolutely what I want. It's kind of like the Santa Claus in the sky. I'm going to give you the prayer. You give me what I want. I'm going to write out my list, and I want you to fulfill that list. That's not how prayer works. That's not, and I don't care who tells you it is, it's not. Because when you think about prayers that have been answered immediately on the spot, what is that? Maybe 1/10 of 1% of prayers that have been offered, even if it's that high. It is a rare time when I pray and boom, God answers that prayer. I'm not saying he doesn't do that. There may very well be occasions when he does, but that's not going to be the normal approach. Because it's oftentimes going to be the case that God is teaching me how to deal with something by answering that prayer in slow motion. If I may, let me go back to the illustration with the Millers and their diagnosis, their daughter's diagnosis of having cancer. I'm sure that there were many times when they prayed, please let our daughter be healed from this cancer. But when you read the book, which you need to do, you're going to find that that was a multi-year journey. And they went through horrific times. They saw suffering, and they saw pain, and they saw emotional draining. But yet at the end of this journey, they look back on it and they say, God was teaching us some pretty important lessons. And maybe what they didn't see as readily is that God was teaching a lot of other people very important lessons. People who were also praying all around the world that this child could be healed. They're seeing God in action. Now, was the journey pleasant? It absolutely was not. About the same time they were dealing with this, I knew another family who was dealing with a very similar situation that did not have the same ending. Yet, what is this family to this day still doing? They're using what went on in that sickness with their child to encourage others, to help other children who are suffering in that situation. In other words, they did not see a no to the answer to their prayers as God saying, I don't care anything about you. They're seeing it as an opportunity. If you're suffering from depression, God is not telling you no. God is not saying to you, I don't care about you. God is saying, I'm going to provide what you need, but you got to trust me. You've got to make those changes in your life that I've told you about in my word, or that others are helping you to see. So never think that God has turned his back on you because you pray and you don't get exactly what you want immediately. You're joining everybody else who prays, who for whatever they're praying for, they don't get an immediate answer. Now, let me show you one of those lifestyle changes that when you pray to God, He is going to provide for you. And that's a community around you. When we think about overcoming a problem of any kind, our community, the people who we're around, are the people who are going to help us. Now, let's put that to the test biblically. The Apostle Paul, though I probably shouldn't do this, I consider to be a spiritual hero. And I think if I could just attain to even a smattering of what the Apostle Paul was, I'm going to be very strong. But yet I want you to note what he says to the Corinthians. He says, but God who comforts the downcast comforted us. He's putting himself in the number of the downcast. And he says, God comforted us by the coming of Titus. So here is a man who comes, and Paul says, we were down, we were melancholy, we were blue, but yet Titus lifted us up. Here's community. We think also about 1 Thessalonians 5:14, where he says, we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. Encouraging the faint-hearted is a type of depression. And so God is saying to us, what we need to do is to help one another, to encourage those who are having difficulty. And we think of a whole host of passages that deal with one another. And I'll not list them all up, but you think about loving one another, encouraging one another, be patient with one another, all these different things that show the relationship. We need community. Yet, when we think about this, depression tempts us to withdraw. This is another one of those things that the enemy is doing. The enemy is saying, nobody can understand you. You're a victim to all of this, and they don't get that. So you need to pull away. You don't need to listen. You don't need to associate. You go to your room and you sit there and you don't listen to these folks who have no idea what you're going through. And for Christians, this is often the temptation to say, well, I'm not going to go to church. Those people there don't care about me. They don't understand me. They don't sympathize with me. They don't talk to me. Do you hear the enemy? What the enemy is saying to you? And so the lifeline, in a lot of ways, the enemy is saying, you need to sever. You need to cut it off. Let me make a couple of comments on both sides of the fence here. If you're suffering with depression, be patient with those who are trying to help. Because there are going to be occasions when people are going to say the wrong thing. But understand with that they may be saying the absolute right thing in the wrong way. Let me illustrate that. Someone comes to you and says, look, you just got to get over this. And you're thinking to yourself, wow, I wish I had thought of that. Why didn't I come up with the idea of I've just got to get over it? And obviously, you're saying, if I could just get over it, I would. But yet, there are times when that absolutely is the right advice. There are times when someone in a spiritual kind of way needs to give us a kick in the pants and say, look, you got to get over that X. Well, at this point in your life, that may be the absolute wrong time to say it. Be patient. Here is a person who is trying to be the community. Here's a person who may have said the right thing in the wrong way or the wrong thing at the wrong time, but yet they're trying to help. Don't get angry because of that. This is a person that has your best interest in mind. Now let me jump on the other side of the fence. If I'm not suffering from depression and I want to help someone who is, there are some things I need to understand as well. I need to be very careful about making statements like, well, you just got to get over it. You just got to snap out of this thing, because that may be the very wrong thing to say. I need to think through my words. But also, I need to make sure that I don't give up. Depression, in causing someone to withdraw, means that a relationship is not going to be reciprocated. Here's what I mean by that. I may go to this person and really encourage and really try to help. And then I get to a point in my own life where I'm having trouble, and this person never comes to me. This person who I've gone out of my way to help and to say things to never comes to me. I cannot get angry about that. Or if I'm always the one who's saying, look, let's go do this, let's go have lunch, let's go get a cup of coffee, but this person never is calling me and reciprocating, I can't allow that to kill the attitude, though that's a huge temptation. Because it may be that I'm convincing myself, well, this person doesn't want me around. This person doesn't want a relationship, and usually that's absolutely the wrong take. So whichever side of the relationship I'm on, I've got to be careful. I can't cut people off. I can't dismiss them. I can't say you don't understand what I'm going through. On the other side, I can't say I know exactly how you feel. This is the advice that you need to follow, or I'm going to quit because you're not returning the favor to me. I need to connect to community, but yet understand that sometimes that's going to be really, really hard to do. Let me provide one more point. And I've just simply entitled this, We Need to Sweat. Work is a highly valued thing in the Bible. Physical labor is praised. I think about Ecclesiastes 5, where the writer says, sweet is the sleep of the laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. If you work a hard labor job, you can scoff at what I'm about to say. But many of us do not work at hard physical labor. We still come home tired, but it's because we've been in meetings all day, or we've been in front of a computer all day, or we've been trying to solve a problem. It's not because we've been swinging a hammer or chopping down a tree or doing anything of that nature. And some of that is our very modern, very industrial kind of Western lifestyle. We don't sweat enough. And that can lead then to sleepless nights because we're just really not physically tired. We may be mentally tired. We may have problems kind of calming our brain down, but our body has just not given off much energy for that day. Now, how does all of this come into the idea of overcoming depression? We need to understand that mind and back have got to be put into overcoming it. I can assure you that in this recent pandemic, I spent more time cutting brush than I have in the past 2 years. I cut down small trees, and I cleared bushes, and I weeded weeds that had gotten way too high. There were a lot of days I went to bed exhausted because that's what I needed. And so I don't want you to minimize the physical labor. Have something to do. Now, not everybody works. Not everybody has the back 40. Not everybody can just go out any day of the week and cut bushes. And I understand that. But there are ways of expending energy, even in our industrial culture, that can send us to bed tired. But let's put another spiritual spin on this. One of the best things we can do is to get tired by serving other people. You see, depression creates an atmosphere of selfishness. It creates an attitude that says, what are people doing for me? Or more likely, what are people not doing for me? Why did someone not call me today? Why did I not get a letter in the mail? Why didn't someone invite me over for dinner? Why didn't somebody call me to come to the party? All right, so here's our enemy again. It's that enemy of saying nobody likes you. That's why. Nobody cares anything about you. How do I overcome that? Well, let's kill two birds with one stone. Not only am I overcoming that spirit of nobody likes me, but I'm also getting tired by helping somebody else. I'm taking the focus off myself and I'm placing it on others. So maybe here's a widow who needs help with her yard. Or maybe here's an older couple that can't get out and cut the bushes anymore. Or maybe here's somebody who needs a meal brought over. And so I say, today, I'm defeating depression. And I'm going to take it captive by the fact of I'm not even going to think about it. I'm going to focus in on cutting someone else's yard, preparing a meal for somebody else, or if I'm beyond that, even in my physical condition, I'm going to write 5 letters today of encouragement to people. You see what's going on? I'm using energy, but I'm using it in a very positive way. And what does that do? Well, that helps me fulfill the commands of the Bible. Philippians 2:4, let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. And it helps me to imitate Jesus Christ, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Here's what I do. I take care of other people. And in that, their interests become my interest, and my interests are put on the back burner. Selfishness cannot have my mind for that day. Depression cannot convince me nobody likes me because I'm too busy helping other people. That's how we overcome. And those are the biblical solutions. Now, let's go back to our original point. How am I going to overcome depression? I got to have a change in lifestyle. I can't depend on a pill by itself. I've got to be busy building my relationship with God. I've got to be busy building a relationship with other Christians. I've got to be busy helping others who have need. Now, one of the keys of dealing with a chronic problem is to realize that when I get up tomorrow, the problem is still there. And I put on my battle clothes and I go to work defeating it. But it just may be that if I can spend enough of my life in these God-given solutions, then I develop the kind of lifestyle where depression is no longer the thought that I wake up with in the morning. Oh, it may creep back in. And there may be days where I'm really fighting the blues, but it's not debilitating because it tells me to get up and to do something. And if you're struggling with this, I know that's hard to hear, but I hope you'll take this wisdom not from me, but from the Word of God. So then, if I'm going to overcome depression, that means looking upward and it means looking outward. Trusting God, even if my prayer is not answered immediately, that He cares and that He is working a long-term solution for me. And when I can do that, I can then understand that the Bible has given me steps to help into fighting this problem that seeks to discourage me from loving life and seeing good days. I want you to know what's been said in this presentation is said in love and not in a judgmental way, but to help those who are dealing with this difficult time to come back to the ability to love God, to love one another, and to love life. Thank you so much for joining us in this presentation.